G'day, this is Chris Savage from Our Real Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the Book of Revelation. I pray that this will be of benefit to you and that it will help you to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Saviour, Jesus. Thank you for coming. A couple of weeks ago when we finished up, what we looked at last time, we saw the two witnesses. Their ministry lasted for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, 1260 days, and they were ministering in Jerusalem. If you remember, these were described as the two olive trees and the two candlesticks. And this, we found out, comes from Zechariah chapter 4, verses 1 to 14. We know that these two men were very powerful. They would kill their enemies with fire. And they were able to stop it raining. They were able to turn water into blood. They were able to bring plagues upon the earth. Even though they primarily ministered in Jerusalem, they were worldwide influence. And in fact, they were unable to be killed until they had finished the ministry that they were given, and they were killed by the Antichrist. And if you remember, they were rejoicing because they left these two men lying in the street for 3.5 days. And at the end of 3.5 days, after they were giving out all their presents to celebrate the death of these two, they watched them rise from the dead. They were resurrected from the dead into heaven. And we know that this is the third sign of Jonah that Jesus talked about. And when they were taken up, Jerusalem was then struck by an earthquake. 1/10 of the city was gone. 7,000 people got killed. And we see the Jews begin to turn to God. The seventh trumpet was sounded, and with it comes the announcement of the imminent rule of Christ over this kingdom, the world. And we remember the seventh trumpet contains the 7 bowl judgments. Now, just last time we quickly looked at Matthew 24, and Jesus said, listen, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation setting himself up in the temple and declaring himself to be God, he says, get out of Israel, flee from Israel as fast as you can, and do not look back, do not turn back, just get out of Israel. Why? Because that is going to be the time when the Jews are really going to be persecuted, be hunted. Now, this is where we're up to today. We're up to chapter 12, verse 1, and just thinking back to that background of Matthew 24, when Jesus warns them. Chapter 12 essentially records Satan's war against Israel, especially in the tribulation. With the first 5 verses here in chapter 12, it's something that is past history. This is not in the future. We're looking back into past history in Revelation 12, verses 1 to 5. And what we see here is a great sign was seen in heaven. This is chapter 12, verse 1. And a great sign was seen in heaven. A woman arrayed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she crieth out, travailing in birth and in pain to be delivered. And there was seen another sign in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his heads 7 diadems. And his tail draweth the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon standeth before the woman that is about to be delivered, that when she is delivered, he may devour her child. And she was delivered of a son, a man-child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and unto his throne. So what these verses do, it basically summarizes the whole life of Messiah from just before his birth to his ascension. John sees 2 signs in the heavens. In the first sign, what he sees is Israel is pictured as a woman. It's a motif taken from the Old Testament concept of Israel as the wife of Jehovah. Now, Remember, we spoke about Revelation having lots of signs and symbols in it. Well, here's one of those signs which we know from the Old Testament what it is. The sun, moon, and 12 stars are all common Old Testament figures relating to Israel. And the Old Testament background for this is Joseph's dream. Joseph's dream, Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob. Joseph's dream in Genesis chapter 37, verses 9 to 11. And Joseph in his dream, he said, "Behold, I've dreamed yet a dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me." And he told it to his father and to his brethren. His father rebuked him and said unto him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to you in the earth?" So what we see here is that this vision from Revelation 12, 1 to 5, John's vision can easily be interpreted. The sun represents Jacob, the S-U-N, represents Jacob, who was renamed Israel. And both these names were often used to represent the entire nation, Jacob or Israel. And we see that in Isaiah 40, verse 27, Isaiah 49, verse 5, and also Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 10. And we see it in other places, but they're the main ones. The moon represents Rachel, who in turn becomes representative of Jewish women, especially Jewish motherhood. And again, we see this in Jeremiah 31, verse 15, and in Matthew chapter 2, verse 18. 12 stars represent the 12 sons of Jacob, who in turn fathered the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, normally, whenever the word star is used symbolically, it always refers to angels. It has been used this way several times already. We've seen it several times already. And it's used this way again here in verse 4. And this is the verse that teaches that 1/3 of the angels God created fell with Satan. He drew 1/3 of the heavenly host to himself to follow after him. So verse 1 may be the only exception to this rule. We're talking about the star being based upon Joseph's dream, because the 12 stars in Joseph's dream obviously represented the 12 sons of Jacob, because Joseph said that 11 stars are going to bow down before him. He was a 12th star. So what we see here is that this is the exception to when we talk about stars. Now, when a star is used symbolically for an angel, no actual star is seen, right? Rather, an angel is seen, but the angel is called a star. Back in Revelation chapter 8, verse 11, I think there was a fallen star. His name was Wormwood. What John saw was an angel, but called him a star. And since in the Old Testament, that was the symbol for the angels. But what Joseph actually saw were stars in heaven, but they represented his brothers. So, what am I trying to say to you? The woman arrayed with the sun, moon, and stars is representative of Israel, not the church. In verse 2, this woman is seen in the final stages of pregnancy, and she's about to give birth to a child. So the vision then is of the nation of Israel just before the birth of the Messiah. And a good reason why this cannot be the church is that it would be a chronological error, because the church does not give birth to Jesus. Actually, Jesus gives birth to the church. So it can't be the church, as some would teach. Now, at the time that John sees this woman, Israel, in a vision, he sees her in travail. She's going through birth pangs, about to be delivered of a son. And at the same time, John sees a second sign in verse 3 in heaven. What does he see? He sees a dragon, who is Satan, having 7 heads and 10 horns. What these 7 heads and 10 horns represent is the final form of the 4th Gentile world empire. We're going to see more of this in Revelation chapter 13 and 17. But for now, what we need to know is that Satan is seen using human government under his control to try and destroy the man-child when he's born. The 7 diadems that we see here point to a concept of conquest. Satan wrestled authority over the earth from man, and the Gentile empires wrestled authority from Israel. In verse 4, these 2 signs come together, the woman and Satan. Satan now brings his entire demonic host out of his 3rd abode, or his 3rd dwelling place, and he, using his permission of access to the earth, he brought them down to the earth in an effort to try to slaughter the child about to be born. Remember, these first five verses are looking back in history. So this demonic host is comprising 1/3 of the stars, meaning 1/3 of the angels that God created. We don't know the exact number, how many were created. All we know is that 1/3 of them followed after Satan. We do know that there's an innumerable, a lot of angels, and 1/3 revolted with Satan against God. And this is the only place that it tells us how many angels fell with Satan. So this attempt to destroy the child was, we see it first up, was the slaughter of babies in Bethlehem. And we see that in Matthew chapter 2, verses 16 to 18. We see this historically in Rome against Israel, more particularly with Herod the Great against the babies in Bethlehem. Herod the Great, he was appointed by Rome. He was king in Judea. He found out about the possible birth of a messianic king. What does he do? He sends his soldiers down to Bethlehem to kill every male child under the age of 2. And that's the incident that John alludes to here in this passage. And that as the time of the birth of the child, time when Jesus was born. So Satan was standing by with his host to see what he could do to destroy the child at his birth. What we know is that Satan's attempt to destroy the Messiah, both before his proper time, and remember his proper time is Passover, he has to die at Passover, and by the wrong means, they're always trying to stone Jesus, he has to die by crucifixion. And this continued right throughout Jesus' career. So the bringing down of the entire demonic host was evident right throughout the life of Jesus, because there's a tremendous amount of demonic activity in the Gospels, and we saw so little of it back in the Old Testament. And then following the Gospels, there's a decrease of demonic activity as we see in the book of Acts. But later on, before Christ's second coming, we're going to see a massive demonic activity again to try and stop him from coming. Now in verse 5, ultimately the child was born. So this verse points out the failure of Satan's attempt to destroy the child. And then the child, destined to rule the nations with a rod of iron, he survived until his proper time for death came. And after his resurrection, he ascended into heaven. And again, this is proof of Satan's failure and Christ's victory. We see this in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 20 to 23, where he ascended, took captivity captive with him. So where is he now? Where's Jesus now? He's presently seated at the right hand of God the Father. So these first five verses are pretty much the historical dealing with the time of the birth of Jesus and the ascension of Christ. We don't see anything in between, because it simply is to point out that Satan failed in his mission. That's all that these verses are telling us. Satan failed. Okay. Now, John has already introduced Israel in the figure of a woman, and now in verse 6, we find ourselves again in the middle of the tribulation, and this time, what do we find? We find the woman, she's on the run. In verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that there they may nourish her 1,260 days. So Israel, the woman, is on the run. So with Satan's failed attempt to destroy the child, he will now turn against the woman, the nation Israel that produced the child. And so Satan's perpetual hatred of Israel is based on the fact that it is through Israel that God will fulfill his program of redemption. And so now this is a pickup from Matthew 24, when we saw in the last lesson when Israel was on the run. Matthew 24 pictures the place of running as the mountains. It says, flee to the mountains. Here in Revelation 12, verse 6, it pictures it as being in the wilderness. But it is a specific place in the mountains and in the wilderness. It's a place where God protects her and nourishes her for a period of 3.5 years or 1,260 days. So what we see here is that with the woman fleeing into the wilderness, into the mountains, when they flee there, they're going to go to a specific spot, and in that spot, God's going to protect them, and he's going to provide for them throughout the second half of the tribulation, the last 3.5 years. Now, verse 6 told us Israel is on the run in the middle of the tribulation. It didn't tell us why. It just says she's on the run. But in verses 7 to 12, we'll be given the answer. So this is Revelation 12, verse 7 to 12. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels going forth to war with the dragon. And the dragon warred and his angels, and they prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast down, the old serpent, he that is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was cast down to the earth, and his angels were cast down with him. We'll see on the next slide. We've got some more information regarding this. Now, his names, that is. Now, Satan's present abode, his present dwelling place, is in the atmospheric heavens, because we see in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, he's spoken about as being the prince of the power of the air. Now, from the middle of the tribulation period, in this atmospheric heavens, war breaks out between Satan and his angels and against Michael the archangel and his angels. And in this conflict in the atmospheric heavens, Satan comes out the loser. He'll then be cast down to the earth, and the earth will become his fourth dwelling place, or his fourth abode. He has 6 abodes. I made a slide for that today for you. So he'll be then confined to the earth for the remainder of the tribulation, the second half, the second 3.5 years. So Satan's not confined to the earth now. He's still ruling in the atmospheric heavens. That's where he dwells. So the result of his casting out of this atmospheric heavens, there is both joy and there's woe. The rejoicing part we see in verses 10 to 12. It says, I heard a great voice in heaven saying, now is come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, who accuseth them before our God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they loved not their life even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and ye that dwell in them. So, there is victory over Satan through the blood of the Lamb. This is verse 11. There's victory over Satan through the blood of the Lamb. What's the blood of the Lamb do for us? It's salvation, right? We're washed in the blood of the Lamb. And through through our testimony or our witness, even if it leads to death, seeming defeat is actually a victory over the enemy of our souls. So that's how we defeat him, through the blood of the Lamb, through salvation, and through our witness and testimony. Now we know that in heaven it says that there's a great rejoicing because Satan is now confined in his fourth dwelling place, the earth. for the next 3.5 years. So his access to heaven to be the accuser of the brethren is now forever removed. He cannot do that anymore in heaven. So there's much rejoicing in heaven. But the problem here is that he's now confined to the earth. Different story on the earth. It says, woe for the earth and for the sea, because the devil is gone down unto you, having great wrath, knowing that he hath but a short time. For the earth, there's nothing but woe. And the reason for this woe is this. Satan is now full of wrath. He is enraged. Why is he so enraged? Why is he full of wrath? Why is he angry? Because he knows that his time is short. He knows he only has 3.5 years before the second coming of Jesus. And so he has to go all out to try and stop the second coming of Jesus. Now, here's the names that we saw back there in those first couple of verses of Satan. Great dragon just demonstrates his fierceness. Old serpent, well, he was a serpent. He stood up as a serpent in the Garden of Eden, caused man to sin. Devil means he's the accuser. And then we have Satan. He's our adversary, deceiver. Well, he is the master counterfeiter. He comes as an angel of light. So there are 5 names, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names of Satan. Each of them describe a particular facet of his life, if you like. And here, this is a slide I added today for you, just to give you the 6 abodes, or the 6 dwelling places of Satan over his span of life. We see, first up, he was at the throne of God. We see that in Ezekiel 28, 11 to 15. He was also, his dwelling place was also the mineral garden of Eden. And we see that again in Ezekiel 28, 11 to 15. Now he's in the atmospheric heavens. We see that in Ephesians 2:2 and Ephesians 6:12. He's going to be cast down to the earth in the midpoint of the tribulation. Revelation 12, we just looked at that, 7 to 12. And then the next dwelling place for him is the abyss. It's in Hades or hell. That's Revelation 20, verse 1 to 3. And his final dwelling place will be the lake of fire. And that we'll see when we get to Revelation 20, verses 7 to 10. So that sort of gives us a hint of his career, if you like. He has different facets to his career there. Now, verse 13 picks up from verse 6. Israel is on the run. Verse 6 tells us the woman Israel, she's on the run. She's heading for the wilderness. Verses 7 to 12 gave us the reason why she was on the run. Satan's cast down to the earth and he's confined to the earth. Now, verse 13, we pick it up. When the dragon, Satan, when the dragon saw that he was cast down to the earth, he persecuted the woman that brought forth the man-child. And there were given to the woman the 2 wings of the great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness onto her place, where she's nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. Now here's the sequence. In verse 12, Satan's angry because he knows his time is short. Verse 13, knowing his time is short, he begins to persecute the woman. He persecutes the Jews. Now, why should he pick just on the Jews, just because his time is short? Why? Because Jesus would not return at the second coming to set up the kingdom until the Jewish people ask him to come back. Why do we say that? Because in Hosea chapter 5, verse 15 to chapter 6, verse 2, Hosea 5:15 says, this is God speaking. He says, I will return again to my place until they, Israel, acknowledge their guilt and seek my face, and in their distress earnestly seek me. So what we see here is that just as the Jewish leaders once led the nation to the rejection of the Messiahship of Jesus, at some time in the future, they must someday lead the nation to accept Jesus as the Messiah. Until Israel is regenerated, until Israel requests the return of the Lord will not return. And Satan knows this very well. He only has a short time, and that is why he is angry, and that is why he's now after Israel, after the Jewish people. So Jesus is not coming back when all the governments of the world are Christian. He's not coming back when the world is Christian. He's coming back when the Jewish nation recognizes he's a Messiah and asks for him to come back. That's when he's coming back. Now, at this stage now, Satan sets out his program to destroy the Jews once and for all. If he can succeed in destroying all the Jews before they have a chance to ask Jesus Christ to come back, Christ will not come back, and Satan's career is safe for all eternity. Now, from this we can see that right throughout history, all the anti-Semitism that we've seen, and you and I, we both know that it is an unnatural hatred of the Jews. There's no reason to hate the Jews. However, Satan is at work right throughout history, right back from the days of Pharaoh, and remember Haman in the book of Esther, and to our modern history, we have Hitler and Stalin, all out to eliminate the Jewish people. But especially we see here the explanation for what is going to be happening in the tribulation. And that is Satan, he needs to wipe them out. While Satan will expend all his energy for one goal, and that is the destruction of the Jews once and for all. And that is what his mission is. And so what we see, verses 13 to 14, again, it's referring back to verse 6. He persecutes the woman who flees into the wilderness where she's prepared for a time, times, and half a time. Again, that's the second half of the tribulation, the last 3.5 years. And the figure of flight that we see here in connection with the wings of the eagle is interpreted by its usage elsewhere in the scripture. And this same figure we see back in Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, and Deuteronomy 32, verse 11. And this was in connection with the Exodus from Egypt. What does it do? It describes a successful flight or escape after being pursued because of divine intervention. It is not the US Air Force, as the Americans like to think, because, hey, the eagle represents the US, but it represents other nations as well. This simply is a divine deliverance. Israel was pursued by the Egyptian army, but succeeding in escaping into the wilderness of Sinai due to divine intervention. And here again, in the future, Israel is going to be pursued, but escapes safely into another wilderness due to divine intervention. And that's simply what the wings of the eagle represent. It's not a giant eagle who flies down and whisks them all away. It simply is divine intervention. Verse 15, and the serpent cast out of his mouth after the woman water as a river, that he might cause her to be carried away by the stream. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the river which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So, in his initial attempt in the middle of the tribulation to destroy the Jews is by casting out water, which is flood waters here. And again, this is symbolic. Whenever the concept of a flood is used symbolically, it is always a symbol of a military invasion. The initial military invasion that Satan tried to use to destroy the woman was the invasion that we see back in Daniel chapter 11, verse 41. And that invasion culminates with the abomination of desolation. However, we see that God will miraculously intervene and destroy the forces that are pursuing the woman into the wilderness. It is not a flood of water. It is a military a military force heading after the Jews in flight. Now the woman arrives in that special protected spot, And that special spot is given to us in another Old Testament prophet, Micah. Micah chapter 2, verse 12. He tells us that it is the ancient city of Bozrah, as Hebrew, better known today as by its Greek name of Petra. Petra. Bozrah of the Old Testament or Petra of the New. So what we see here is that there's a segment of the Jewish people who escape into that city, Petra. Now, when Satan realizes that he has failed to destroy the nation as a whole, and one segment has now escaped into the wilderness to the city of Bozrah or Petra, he now moves out against the Jews who have not made it to that city. Verse 17. And the dragon waxed wroth with the woman and went away to make war with the rest of her seed that keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. So a segment of Israel has escaped, but that does not include the members of the 144,000 Jews who are the ones who hold the testimony of Jesus. So now he moves out on a program to try to slay all Jews, but especially Jewish believers. Why? Because it will be the Jewish believers who hold the key to the second coming of Christ. Why? Because they know what the gospel is, and knowing the ingredient that will bring about the second coming of Christ. They know that the leadership of the nation has to call for his return, has to accept that he's the Messiah and call for his return. So what we see here is the war is on. He has failed to destroy that segment of the Jews who made their escape into Bozrah. They've escaped successfully, and it's that segment that's going to bring about Satan's doom, because it is that segment that will still be living just before the return of the Lord. It is that segment who are in hiding in Bozrah that is going to bring about the second coming of Christ. And verse 17 now ends with the statement that he's now going to make war with the rest of her seed, and the rest of the woman's seed, rest of the Jews. And at this point, his full-scale program to destroy the Jews is now full on. And the means by which he will try to destroy the Jews once and for all is by means of the two beasts of Revelation 13. So chapter 12 gave us the program. Program is total destruction of the Jews. Chapter 13 will give us the means of that destruction, or that attempted destruction, which is the two beasts of chapter 13. Okay, now, beast from the sea. We're gonna have to go back into Daniel to look at some of this stuff. We see the beast from the sea. We see here we're going to look at the final stage of the fourth Gentile empire, and this is the fourth beast of Daniel 7. And this is in Daniel 7. It has 10 horns, 7 heads. We just saw that in chapter 12. Now, to understand the course of the beast from the sea, we need to look at 4 passages, and we're going to look at a couple of them. Well, we're going to try to look at 2 of them tonight. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31 to 45, Daniel chapter 7, verse 1 to 28, Revelation 13, 1 to 10, and Revelation 17, 7 to 14. And each of these passages will build upon the previous passage. So we're going to start off with a narrow picture, and we're going to expand that picture to know exactly what this beast is and how it's going to come about. So we're going to go back into Daniel's history now, and we're going to look at in Daniel chapter 2 verses 31 to 35. What we're going to look at here is Nebuchadnezzar, King of Babylon, had a dream. This is verse 31. You, O king, saw and behold a great image. This image, which was mighty and whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the aspect thereof was terrible. As for this image, its head was of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of brass, its legs of iron, its feet part of iron, part of clay. So Daniel gives the king this description of his dream, and it's an awesome image. and he describes the composition of it. It's described head of gold, arm and chest of silver, a belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and down the feet we have feet and toes, part iron, part clay. Two things we need to look at. We'll do this one here, these metals. First of all, the metals increase in strength. We see a gradual increase in strength from gold right down to iron. Silver is stronger than gold, brass is stronger than silver, iron is stronger than all of them. Secondly, we see a decrease in value, in that gold is more valuable than silver, silver more valuable than brass, brass more valuable than iron. And what this is showing us is that the fulfillment of this will be in the decrease of the character of authority and rule. Under Babylon, it was a very highly, it had much more character and authority than on the fourth empire, which is where we are in today. We see some more details in verse 34 to 35. You saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon its feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. So what he sees here now is the image is being destroyed by a stone that smites the image upon its feet. The origin of the stone is that it's cut without hands. What does that mean? It means it has a divine origin. So the destruction of the image, it says the stone smashes it into dust, and it just disappears completely. And then what happens is, it says, verse 35, the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And Daniel records here, the stone becomes a great mountain and it fills the entire earth. Now this is just a bit of a visual there. Head of gold, softest, highest value, breast, silver, legs, part iron, part clay, hardest, least valuable. So the type of government decreases as it gets down to the parts, legs, iron, and part clay. Daniel interprets a dream in verse 36 to 45. The first Gentile empire is described I think I'll cover it a little further on. All right. The first Gentile empire that we see in this dream is described in verses 37 to 38. You, O king, are king of kings, unto whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power and the strength and the glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens has he given into your hand, and has made you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So what we see here is the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar, the head of the Babylonian Empire. It was this empire, the Babylonian Empire, that began which is known as the times of the Gentiles. Jesus speaks of the times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles began when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BC. So from 586 BC, Jerusalem has now been dominated by Gentile powers. So Babylon was the first of the 4 Gentile empires to dominate Jerusalem. The second Gentile empire we see in verse 39. He says, and after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you. The 2 arms of silver united into the breast of silver represent the 2 nations of the Medes and the Persians, who established the Medo-Persian Empire. Third Gentile empire is in second part of 39, and another 3rd kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. So the Medo-Persian Empire was then followed by the Greek or the Hellenistic Empire, symbolized by the belly and 2 thighs of brass. For the 3rd Gentile Empire, territorially, embraced both east and west. This is under Alexander the Great. Now, all these three earlier empires, the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, and the Hellenistic, are all mentioned and labeled by name elsewhere in the book of Daniel. But we're not going to go into all the detail about it, but those three are mentioned elsewhere. The fourth empire is never specifically named, but from Daniel 2, it undergoes at least three stages, which are represented in verses 40 to 43. First stage is a united stage in verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things. And as iron that crushes all these, shall it break in pieces and crush. Secondly, in verse 41, this united stage, which is one empire that crushes all these, it gives way to the two division stage, being the 2 legs and 2 feet. It still has the strength of iron. It says, verse 41, and whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, part of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But there shall be in it the strength of the iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. So what we see here is the fourth Gentile empire will give way to a 10 division stage seen in the 10 toes in verses 42 to 43. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong, partly broken. And whereas you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron does not mingle with clay. So this part of the image is the feet is composed of iron and clay. And so part of this 10 division stage will be strong, part will be brittle and weak. And because it doesn't gel, it's evident in the toes. Unity is impossible here, and the 10 divisions take place because the different elements will not gel together. Now, this fourth Gentile empire is unique from all the previous ones. Why? Because it totally subdues and crushes all that precedes it. And it is this fourth Gentile empire that is particularly emphasized by the text dealing with the times of the Gentiles. Now we have a fifth empire described to us in verses 44 to 45 of Daniel 2. And in the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall the sovereignty thereof be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So in the days of those kings, which are the 10, Daniel says in the days of the 10 toes, the God of heaven is going to set up a kingdom which will overthrow the 4 previous Gentile empires, and the kingdom of God that is going to be set up is going to end the domination of the previous kingdoms. The 5th empire will not be Gentile, but it will be Jewish. And the 2 prominent symbols that are used here, and they're consistent with how they're used elsewhere. Remember, whenever the word stone is used symbolically, it is always a symbol of the second person of the Trinity, God the Son. He's the rock, he's the stone, he's a chief cornerstone. He is, this stone is the Lord Jesus, the Messiah of Israel. So whenever the word mountain is used symbolically, it is always a symbol of a king, kingdom, or a throne. So, following the 4th Gentile empire, God will set up his kingdom, his own kingdom, and this kingdom is set up during the 10 division stage, which we see in Daniel 2. And this brings to an end the domination of the other kingdoms, the other 4 kingdoms. And in the end, the Gentile domination will be smashed at the second coming of the Messiah. And once Gentile domination is smashed by the Messianic stone, the kingdom of God is set up by this stone. Just a quick summary. All the Gentile empires are all temporary. God's kingdom is eternal. And we have here the first Gentile empire was the Babylonian Empire, the second Medo-Persian, the third the Hellenistic Empire. The fourth Gentile empire went through 3 stages. It was the United stage, the 2-division stage, and then the 10-division stage. And the fifth empire is the Messianic kingdom. We're going to come back to this. Now we're going to Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 to 8. This deals with another aspect of the times of the Gentiles. Again, same 4 empires will be brought into here, but we're going to have a little bit more detail on the different figures. And Daniel in chapter 7, he sees 4 visions, and he describes the 4 visions. The first vision begins with a vision of the great sea in verses 2 to 3. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven broke forth upon the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The great sea is the Mediterranean Sea, and it represents the Gentile world. And there are other scriptures where this is found, Isaiah chapter 17, 12 to 13, Matthew 13, 47 to 50, Revelation 13, 1, and chapter 17, verse 1, and chapter 17, verse 15. So in verse 2 here, we see the great sea. It's troubled by 4 winds. The winds themselves point to God's sovereignty and providence, while the number is the same as the Gentile empires. And suddenly, in verse 3, in this vision, in this Daniel's vision, 4 beasts arise from the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, each one being different from the other. And all 4 are Gentile, and all 4 arise out of the Mediterranean area. First beast we see in Daniel 7, verse 4. First was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings whereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon 2 feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So we have this first beast. It had an eagle wing like, and it was lion-like, Babylonian Empire. The latter part of verse 4 is probably a reference to with it being lifted up, plucked up like a man. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar went through a period of time where he was like an animal in the fields eating grass because of his pride. So as much as it was possible for a man to become a beast, Nebuchadnezzar became one, and as close as the beast could become a man, so did Babylon eventually lose its beast-like nature, and as it moved from the lust of conquest to the building of culture. Second beast is in verse 5. Another beast, a second like to a bear, was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. Second beast is bear-like, represents the Medo-Persian Empire. This bear is lopsided. Well, it's raised up on one side. Why? Because the Medes and Persians, even though they were allies, even though they were Confederates, the Persians were by far the dominant power, making it a lopsided alliance. And the bear we see here has 3 ribs in its mouth, having devoured flesh. And historically, these 3 ribs represent the 3 kingdoms conquered by the Medo-Persian forces, which gave them their empire status, and they were Lydia, Babylonia, and Egypt. Here we also see that the bear is less majestic than the lion, is bulky and weighty, Medo-Persian conquered by sheer force of numbers. So you see, we're seeing a change in the animals are getting less and less, if you like. Verse 6, after this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, who had upon its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So this is a leopard-like beast representing the Hellenistic Empire. The leopard is also less majestic than the lion and less grand than the bear, but it's faster than all of them. And with leopard-like speed, Alexander the Great conquered the Medo-Persian Empire and greatly extended the Hellenistic Empire. And at his death, what happened? The empire split into 4 kingdoms. When he died, his empire eventually split into those 4 kingdoms. The 4 kingdoms were Egypt, Syria, Macedonia, and Thrace. And the 4 wings represent the 4 kingdoms rising out of Alexander's empire, and the 4 heads represent the 4 generals who took control of the 4 kingdoms. Ptolemy over Egypt, Israel and Arabia, Petria, Seleucus over Syria, Babylonia, and as far as India, Cassandra over Macedonia and Greece, and Lysimachus over Thrace and Bithynia. So this animal with the 4 wings, 4 heads, it's explained. So in the first vision, then 3 beasts were raised up. Now, the second vision, this describes the 4th beast. This beast is unlike the other beasts. It is nondescript. The others are given animal-like descriptions, but no description for this 4th beast. Verse 7, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrible and powerful and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So this beast, nondescript. We're given some kind of a description regarding the first 3 beasts, but this one, first one was lion-like, second bear-like, third leopard-like, but this guy, can't describe him. Completely different and diverse from anything that Daniel had seen before, and nothing in the animal kingdom right now seems to portray what he sees in this beast. And in verse 7, this 4th beast is described as being diverse. In other words, it's completely different from all the others. Why? Because it completely subdues and it breaks in pieces everything that precedes it. It appears as far more ferocious than the previous 3 empires. And this 4th beast had 10 horns. But while it began with 10 horns, an 11th horn rises up in verse 8. This is a little horn. And this little horn uproots 3 of the 10. And having uprooted 3 of the 10 horns, it begins to speak great things. And with the uprooting of 3 horns, 7 of the original horns remain, and the little horn is now an 8th horn rather than an 11th. Once again, in Daniel, just as in Daniel 2, the uniqueness of the 4th empire is here emphasized. It is stated that this empire will go through several stages. The 4th beast represents the 4th Gentile empire. Here's a 3rd vision in Daniel 7, verses 9 to 12. And this vision is the throne of God the Father. It's described by the title of the Ancient of Days in verses 9 to 10. I beheld till thrones were placed, and one that was Ancient of Days did sit. His raiment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and the wheels thereof burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands of thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. So this 3rd vision takes place in heaven, and it's of God the Father ready to move out in judgment against the 4th empire. He's viewed as judge, and the books of judgment is now open, or are now open. And he's surrounded by myriads of angels who will be responsible to carry out these judgments. It's this 4th Gentile empire that is being judged in verses 11 to 12. I beheld at that time, because of the voice of the great words which the horns spoke. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed, and it was given to be burned with fire. And as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So in verse 11, what we see here is that it's the fourth beast, particularly the little horn, that is judged and destroyed. Now, as for the other three beasts, verse 12 tells us two things. First, their dominion was taken away. And secondly, their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. We're going to look at this in Revelation 13, verses 1 to 10. Now we see the fourth vision. This is Daniel's fourth vision. Verse 13 to 14. I saw in the night visions, and behold, there came with the clouds of heaven one like unto a son of man, and he came even to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So the fourth vision begins with the setting up of the kingdom of God, following the destruction of the fourth Gentile empire. And in verse 13, we see the second coming of the Messiah in view here, followed by the setting up of the Messianic kingdom in verse 14. And that is where I plan to leave it tonight, because we won't have time. Thank you very much. So if any want to contact us, there's information there on the screen. You can contact us at any time through that.